Welcome. My name is Creighton Jones. Joining me today are members of Lyndon LaRouche's scientific research team, The Basement. Starting to my right are Sky Shields, Leona Fan Chang, and Megan Roulard. What we're going to take up today is a higher understanding of how we should think about what's known as a credit system. Upon the removal of Barack Obama from the office of the White House and the implementation of the Glass-Steagall Standard, the first step which the United States and the world must take is a move towards the implementation of a cooperation among sovereign nation states for a global credit system. Now, most people, when they hear the word credit, the first thing that comes to their mind is money. What we're discussing is something far more transcendental than any simple idea of monetarism or a money-based economy. We're discussing the idea that economy must be organized around the creative potentials of the individual, both as a social process of organization and an organization of the direction of flow of resources, energy, and societal processes. Now, to do that, today we're going to be dipping into the domain of life to see both, one, how we can understand this idea of a directed creative intention manifesting itself in the domain of life, for gaining insight into how we then can coordinate our relationship to the living domain, but also as a way to provide a certain pedagogical context for how we can then come to understand the higher idea of willful creative intention as the principle of a credit system. Now, to start off today, we're going to turn to Leona, who you've recently done some work on a guy, James Dwight Dana, who put forward this notion of cephalization. And it's a concept which Vladimir Vernadsky, someone we've discussed a couple of times on this program, has also put a spotlight on as really giving a real pedagogical case study of what is this directed process in evolution. So maybe you could go into a bit of what that work is and what the relevance is to this discussion.
Sure. Looking at Dana in this period actually shows very clearly that what LaRouche is discussing right now around a credit system is just the way that the universe has worked forever. And what he draws out is through the process of looking at the evolution of species from the very lowest up to human beings. If you look at that as a whole, there's no question about it. There's a very clear direction. It's never backwards. And yet it's not, it doesn't seem to be, you can't plot it step by step at the same time. And so, for example, you take one form, let's say all of crustaceans, and as you see the progression of crustaceans, you'll see a gradual motion toward really a mobility of what we would call hands now, but of course they didn't have hands, but claws or some form of limbs that are specifically to help the head and specifically to help actual, what we would now call thought, though I wouldn't give too much thought to crabs, for example.
Right.
And as you progress through into insects, onto land, and so on, this is continually the case, where there's mobility of the arms, there's a distinction of the head, there's an increase of centralization of the nervous system to be able to take in sense perceptions and actually think about them instead of just immediately reacting to them, for example, with complete disregard of whether that reaction is the right one or not.
Right.
And so what you see through each of these lineages, whether they be crustaceans or insects or jellyfish or whatever, is that there's always a progression. And especially, for example, in mammals. And you see between whales to horses to ultimately human beings, you have an increase in the capability to really stop just using everything for purely locomotion. You know, where, for example, many mammals even use sensory apparatus purely for navigation.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings use very little of it for navigation alone.
Right, right.
And also legs. I mean, I think we are the only mammal that uses our upper limbs purely for other things other than locomotion. Even monkeys, you see, monkeys, they eat and they pick branches and so on, but they're also swinging and on their knuckles and so on.
Right. So that's what characterizes this idea of cephalization. You're saying is that it's this progression towards more and more of the organization of the living system towards facilitating and compacting the central nervous system.
Yes.
So it's less and less of the body is for other locomotion, as you're saying, more and more organized towards facilitating, feeding, developing, acting for the central nervous system, for the brain, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not even, right now, if you look up cephalization, that's how they define it, is the nervous system and the brain. But really what Dana shows is that it's the whole entire being.
Right.
It's everything. And it's everything tending towards something that no individual species knows about.
Right, right.
So it seems almost absurd to say that a crab is tending towards thought.
Right.
That its next step in evolution is tending towards thought.
Right.
And yet, if you were to try to explain this process of evolution, that there really is no other way to say it than other than, really, look, you are creating something at that point seems to be irrelevant, and yet is necessary for eventually the mind to be able to take this apparatus and have power in the universe.
Right.
To understand and have power in the universe.
Right. Well, that's interesting because it seems like what you're saying is that in the moment, say you were to look at any one of these